Okay, hello and welcome. What does it take to be a strategic leader? Now, that's the topic of conversation today. And I'm Lee Holtwood. I'm the CEO here at the CCMA. And we know that the industry has evolved massively in recent years with a spotlight on real colleague well-being, and obviously no more important than right now. But at the same time, senior leaders are having to transform their customer experience, adopt more technologies, and they need to keep moving with the pace. Now, we know that the fundamentals of a contact center have not really changed. However, the infrastructure within the operation has become increasingly more complex. And as a result, new skills are needed. And we're really seeing roles such as data analysts, IT analysts, communications specialists and other real specialist roles really emerging. And what I've been reflecting on is that the contact center is really becoming a business unit in itself. Now it's with this backdrop that we wanted to pose the question, what does it take to be a strategic leader in the contact center today? Now, to help us explore this question, I'm delighted to be joined by Rory Underwood, MBE, former England, British and Irish Lions rugby player, RAF pilot, and now a TEDx speaker on leadership. He's going to be joining me in a moment. We'll then open the floor and have a live debate with our panelists. And oh, what a lineup have we got supporting Rory and I. So we've got Helen Wilson, the Chief Operating Officer at Atom Bank, Anita Yandel-Jones, who is the Chief Customer Officer at Ecotricity. We have Emma Dark, who is the Director of Consumer Care at Estee Lauder, and Emma Crow, who is the Executive Director for HR in EMEA for TTEC. So a fantastic lineup with lots of strategic and operational experience in the contact center behind them. So as always, please feel free to share your views and your questions in the chat or the Q&A. We are going to be monitoring it, and I will look to try and bring some of your thoughts and your questions into the conversation, but I'm going to apologize now if I don't get to everything. So before I get started with introducing Rory, I just want to say a big thank you to Genesis and TTEC for enabling us to bring this conversation to you. So thank you, Genesis and TTEC, for supporting us today. So let's get started. Let me introduce you to Rory Underwood. Rory, hello.
Hello, good afternoon. I think it's just gone. Yes, good afternoon.
It has. You can now say good afternoon. Now, I know you from your time playing rugby, and I know there'll be people watching today that will go, Rory Underwood, he's the brilliant rugby player. But since then, you've gone on to be an RAF pilot. You're now doing TEDx talks on leadership, and obviously all the work that you're doing as wingman. But I have to ask you one question before we start. Has your career simply evolved as the opportunities emerged, or did you go, no, I am going to be a rugby player, and then I'm going to be an RAF pilot, and then I'm going to help businesses?
The one that evolved was being pilot. I used to live in Malaysia. I used to go from boarding school back to my parents, obviously, 3 times a year, and that started my whole love of flying, and that's what got me into wanting to think about. Well, basically, I used to sit in the aircraft looking out the window, going, what does he look at the front? So that got me into flying. So that I got sucked in by the RAF propaganda, advertising, and I went to the Air Force at the age of 20. I was playing rugby at school, and I carried on playing rugby, and so I carried on doing both at the same time. And to a certain extent, in some ways it was planned, in some ways it wasn't, because when I was leaving the military, the Air Force, I was going to go and become a jumbo jet pilot for BA. I'd already had discussions, and I was doing my training and stuff. So even though I'd done 18 years in the Air Force, I didn't have a proper civilian license, so I had to convert. But opportunities came up, and I made a decision over the last couple of years of my time in the Air Force that actually I'd go down the consultancy route, and here I'm now 21, 22 years later.
Wow. Wow. So arguably spending more time in business consultancy than you did both at RAF and...
Oh, don't, that's frightening. I've done more time out since I left the military than I've done in. It's frightening.
That is scary, scary. Time does go on. Now, Rory, I'm going to hand over to you because you've got some great insights to share with us. So please do go ahead, share your screen, and I shall be back in about 15 minutes.
Look forward to it. Tester, so see if the technology works. Here we go.
Fabulous. All yours.
We got skiing. Great. Thanks. Thanks, Lee. Okay, so first off, thank you to TTEC and CCMA for inviting me to come along and speak today. I've got about 15 minutes. I'm going to take you through some of my thoughts and my experiences, some ideas around the whole context of thinking strategically from the point of view of leader, but in the context of how an organization does it. And it's not just for just the leaders as well. You could argue that anybody in an organization can think strategically. So the first thing I'm going to do is a big request that I was going to put the video on. So I'm going to do the two things together, otherwise we'll be here all day. So I'm going to talk over it with two videos going. Obviously, I couldn't get the music going. For the statos, Lee's given you a lot of the clues there, but I played 12 years for England from 1984 till 1996. I've got 85 caps and 49 tries for England, some of which you're seeing now. I played in 2 British Lions tours in 89 and 93. My club for most of my career was Leicester Tigers. I played for 14 years. And I retired from rugby from England 96, as I say, and from England, 96, and from club rugby in 99. So I haven't played for, 24 years. I joined the Royal Air Force in 1983 at the age of 20. I've done 18 years. I've flown 15 years of those 18 years. I've got about 3,000 hours flying fast jets, of which one of the ones there, you can see the Hawk. I flew the Tornado, the Canberra, the Domini, and the Jet Provost. And left the Air Force in 2001, having done 18 years, as I said. I did do 3 years flying a desk, as we talk about it in the Air Force. So that was just to give you some sort of background of where I've come from. And pretty much, as I talked about before, I morphed into the consultancy world from having left the military. And teams are my passion. The whole context of teams is trying to provide an environment where teams are able to perform. And so whose responsibility is that? Is obviously the people who are in charge of the people, the supervisors, the managers, and the leaders. And you go from the team itself into the wider aspect of the whole organization and create an environment where people can succeed. And that's what's been driving me ever since I've left and doing all the work I do. So as you know from my background, the first thing I want to stress is that, yes, most people know me as a rugby player. And I'm obviously a lot younger, fitter, and less grey hairs, as you can see there. And that's in the mid-90s. And the game of rugby at the time was an amateur game. So all the games I played at Twickenham in front of 75,000 people, I did not get paid a penny for playing that. Sorry, that's not strictly true. I used to get 12p a mile, which is very generous. So my day job was flying in the Royal Air Force. And so the best way I can describe it to people now who see rugby and see it being a professional sport, back then, my day job, Monday to Friday, was flying jets to the Royal Air Force. And I used to train on a Tuesday night and a Thursday night and play on a Saturday afternoon. And the best way to give an example of that is I played in the World Cup final in 1991, 3 o'clock on Saturday at Twickenham, and 8 o'clock on Monday morning, next 2 days later, I was back at Met Brief, back at Iron Whitton to go back flying again because I've been away for 6 weeks on the World Cup. And so my day job was flying. My hobby was playing rugby for England. And latterly, as I said, I've become a consultant now and have been for the last 22 years. So that gives you a background from my experience of what I've come through. And the one thing from that is just trying to stress how teamwork is fundamental to everything. For me to be the success I had for England in the 90s when we won 3 Grand Slams, to get me into an aircraft and all the support that I need from all the engineers, the air traffic controllers, operations, other people in my squadron for us to get and do the mission that we're supposed to do. And then obviously I'm trying to impart that back to businesses and companies in the context of what I'm trying to do with my consultancy business now. So let's get into something. I'm going to stay with the flying analogy now. I'm going to talk to you about pretty much a sort of analogy that starts to give an idea of the sort of things you need to think about when you're trying to think about how to be more strategic. And so one of the things you've got to think about is how do you operate as a business? And so what I'm going to do is basically teach you how to be pilots, or at least understand how flying works. Because if you take an Airbus 380, it weighs approximately 500,000 kilograms. It's about 50 red double-decker buses. So that's massive. How does that get airborne? So we're going to talk here about the principles of flight. Anybody here who's got a PPL will know these. But aerodynamics, there are 4 factors that make up aerodynamics. Now, you'll have know the words. They're not words you've never heard of before, but probably don't know the relationship. So there are 4. There's the mass of the aircraft, you've got drag. So anything, if you stick your hand out the window when you're in the car driving down the motorway, you feel it on the hand, that's just drag. Obviously, if you do point your fingers, there's less drag, put your hand up, there's more drag. There's obviously thrust. You've got the engines, push the engines, that powers the air coming out of the back of the aircraft. And so the whole concept of how that works to create lift is the mass of the aircraft, and there's a weight, friction on the wheels. You put thrust to try and get moving. It overcomes that weight and drag. You go down the runway, it gets faster and faster. You start getting more wind over the wings. It creates lift. So the lift has got to overcome drag and the mass, and you get airborne. And it's as simple as that. Now, how does that apply in the context of business? So if you think about as a business, mass becomes size. So as a business grows bigger and bigger, it's the size. It's the same with an aircraft. So the more people, the more locations, the more offices, et cetera, the bigger you become. The thing becoming bigger is the more people you have, the more organization, spread around the country, the more offices, it creates drag in the form of complexity. The more levels of management, the more distance and gaps between it, all comes complexity. And you take contact centers and the sizes that they can be. If you think about all the pods you've got across the room, the more and more spread out you are, the more complexity arises because you don't have the same ability to talk to each other. So for me, where lift comes in is that the greater commercial awareness that everybody has in an organization, the greater it lifts everybody to understand how we do what we do in the most effective way to drive the business forward. That's all about the commercial aspect of what we do. What do we do as a business? And it's not just my job, it's the whole of the business. And secondly, team culture, which in effect is teamwork. My passion is teams. The more you can come together and work as teams, the more you're going to get over the whole context of complexity. So if you are going to talk about principles of business and you get a business that's growing and it gets bigger and it gets bigger, after a while, as I've said, complexity and size increase and becomes more complex. And in that context, like I said before, that becomes drag. Now, if I asked any business owner and business leader, and I talked to them about drag, do you sometimes feel that in your organization, in your department, in your area, in your team, is there sort of drag there? And a number of people go, oh, yeah, no, I get that. I don't have to explain aerodynamics to people for them to get that. I'm sure everybody here, I'm sure you're resonating it. I can't see everybody's face, but obviously I'm sure you're recognizing that at times you sometimes, why don't things work as well as they could do? And so this is because as you get bigger, as you get more people, there's more drag being sent to the business. Now, one of the things that is not only just sort of tangible stuff of it, it's also the wider aspect. And this is where it starts tying in with strategy. Now, here is an example of, this is a low-level map. So this is the size of map we have. If I put, there's normally two, there's the north of the UK and the south of the UK. And if you put them together so that they line up, that map is probably about 6 foot or 2 meters from top to bottom. But it gives you sort of information we have. So it's obviously terrain. You can see the contours and you can see the sort of colors that show from the white being lowered to sea level and the darker browns getting higher. And you get all the sense of there with the red areas, which are all the sort of potentially restricted areas. The blue areas are all the zones are. But this gives you an idea of what we use when we go planning and flying around the UK. So on this map, I would start drawing a black line. So the black line signifies the route I want to fly. I start putting headings on there. I start putting timings on there with minute marks. And every 5 and 10 minutes, I would then put a fuel circle where I have how much fuel do I plan to use and how much fuel is the minimum fuel. And so I know I start off in the Hawk with 1,350 kilograms of fuel. So when you go start up, taxi, takeoff, transit, drop into low level, use so much fuel every 5 minutes, you can add that up. And so you end up with the amount of fuel you have left. And so in effect, this plan, this route is like, for me, it's like an analogy of a strategy. This is the plan that I'm going to fly my sortie. But like anything else, I'm preparing to go to war. So in this context, I've got potentially enemy fighters who are trying to come and shoot me down. So while I go and fly the sortie, I may be affected by weather and be taken off track. I may be affected by a fighter that takes me off track. And I've got to go and hit a target on time. So I have to use this map with all the information to try and navigate, no pun intended, through all the different elements of this map of enemy, enemy surface to air mile sights that are simulated, etc., to try and get to my target on time, whilst doing it with 2 or 3 or 4 other aircraft. And so if I get taken off track, obviously I end up being delayed or not sure where my position. So I've got to get myself back on track, back onto my black line. I then know what my timeline is. I know how much fuel I'm using and whether I'm up or down. And then I can work out how to get back on time again to hit my target on time. Which, in fact, if you think about it, is pretty much why we have a strategy. The whole context of having a strategy is so that when you plan to go and do it, and of course things happen, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the Ukraine war, whether it's economic changes with budgets, etc., all these things that you sort of are impossible to plan, when they sort of come and hit you, you've got the ability to try and work out where have I got off track, where have I pushed off track, etc., to try and work out how to get back on track. And if you just take the fuel, about the planned fuel, which you write in black, and then the minimum fuel, so you work from what I've got to have minimum back at base and work the other way, the difference between that fuel, between planned and minimum, is actually what we call combat fuel. So that gives us, we know we've got 100 kilograms of fuel that we can just use for combat. In a business context, you could actually say that's contingency. That's the same sort of thing if you use money as the currency of fuel. So that gives you an idea of something that we use in the military, but it applies the same way into the context of strategy. And why I think it's so important that strategy is really something that everybody tries to get their head around and understand. Because people think it's complicated, it's black magic, it's difficult, it's complicated, but fundamentally, in its simplest sense, it's just a plan so that everybody can gather around and be united and share the purpose and know what we're trying to do together. And that's it. And in fact, if you get pushed off track, it enables you to get back on track. And the reason why it's so important as well is not only are you trying to do that to provide the North Star, how we're going to do it, what we need, etc., but it's fundamentally important that strategy is communicated effectively. And one of the things I find in the organizations I go into is that sometimes people say, we're going to do this, and they just say it and expect everybody to understand it, aware of what they need to do, and know what good looks like. And the number of organizations I go into where that is just not the case. And so if I give you a visual example, the strategy. So as a boss, I'm going to tell you the strategy. But what happens with my team, whether it's the senior management team, a junior management team, or my team, is when they hear the strategy, each of them take off, well, that's the bit I need to do. So I'll just think I'll do that bit. So I'll try and deliver that. And invariably, how do I know whether I'm doing a good job or not? It's normally attached to some sort of monetary value. And the thing is, when you have this collective strategy at the top, and you now have in a situation, you've got 4 different people thinking that well, that's the strategy I was delivering on, and I'll hit that target. That's the important thing for me. I'm just going to go and deliver that. In effect, systemically, we have now created silos in our business. And if you take that on to the next stage, I can't do silos, so I've done brick walls. As they go to their departments and they tell their people the same thing potentially can happen, and the same thing happen again. And when you see this, and you see how potentially brick walls are being built all over the organization, then no wonder drag is created, in that people, when they're trying to work across organizations, I talk about cross-functional relationships, can be so poor. And it's a thing that I find in a lot of organizations I go through. When you think about the sort of things that go on. So that's the sort of drag that you can systemically start by the very top. So get that right to make it much easier. Secondly, how many things do people put into place as you go along, as you get bigger and bigger? Oh, we think we need to do this. Let's do this thing. Let's change the structure a bit. Let's change technology a bit. Let's change the organization a bit. Here's this process can change. That can change. And of course, all that happens over time is things get moving around and trying to keep on track of it. And what started out as a simple, how do we get from A to B as simply possible, starts becoming a much more complex process. And if you're not careful, complexity can kill you. So the challenges, what do you do about it? Well, how do you try and find out what is the drag in your business? Are you aware of it? Is everybody aware of what's happening? Do you understand what it is, why it is, what's the impact of that, and what's the impact it's having on your business? Because unless you do that, then fundamentally you're going to really struggle. So to overcome the drag, you've got to try and overcome that complexity in size and make sure everybody understands the commercial awareness and the team culture of how we work together. Because only then, if you can make sure that your lift is greater than drag, then obviously, you'll go up. And so growth will become so much easier. And that's what I challenge. The things to think about, which become a bit more tangible, is try and think about where you're spending your time. How much time do you think you're spending thinking about yesterday? How much time do you think you're spending on today? And how much time do you think about spending tomorrow? That's a very simple thing to think about. Now, obviously, as you go up an organization and become more into the management and leadership, you should spend more time thinking about tomorrow and planning than actually doing. And the number of large organizations go to where people at a high level are still doing stuff when they shouldn't be. So think about that. How much time do you think you spend about today, tomorrow, and the future? And the sort of strengths that's required. And here gives you an idea of, if you want to increase your skill set, if you want to increase your understanding of what it needs to be the difference between doing, managing, and leading, then here are some of the strengths that you need to think about, how you need to think about it, how you can assess what you're like, how you assess whether you need to improve on various things, and also how you can do it not only as individuals, but as teams. So overall, that's the sort of things that I come across on a regular basis when I go and work with companies. And, you know, strategy, you need to do a 3-year course in university to actually, you know, fill all the stuff that you can potentially talk about. But there's a small flavor of some of the things I was talking about. And so in just wrapping up and finishing off in the context, when you think about either yourself, the team you're involved with, your department, or the organization, how do you deliver strategy effectively? And so therefore think about, how do you overcome your drag? Can you identify awareness and understanding and the impact? And are you aware of what you need to do to create your lift? So there's a very simple questions. How can I overcome my drag? And how can I create my lift? And so hope those 2 questions will provide some direction for you to think about. And I wish you every success in whatever you're trying to do in moving forward. So I'm going to hand back to Lee.
Thank you so much, Rory. There's you've given us already lots to think about, and we're going to be touching back on some of those themes and developing some of those themes over the next 35 minutes. What a fantastic foundation for our discussion. Now, please remember, if you've got any comments or questions you want to share with us, please do put them in the chat and the Q&A, and we will try to come back to those. So to help us explore this a little bit further in the context of the contact centre, please welcome on screen Helen Wilson, the Chief Operating Officer at Atom Bank, Anita Yandel-Jones, the Chief Customer Officer at Ecotricity, Emma Dark, the Director of Consumer Care at Estee Lauder, and Emma Crow from TTEC, who is the Executive Director of HR in EMEA. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I have to start by asking Helen, what is the drag in the contact centre environment today?
Well, I suppose it'll vary to some extent between contact centre to contact centre and business to business. But if I give an example from Atom to try and perhaps illustrate the point. So my strategy is all about making my contact centre as small as I possibly can, which seems a bit strange to some people, but because Atom is a self-service proposition, it's through the app, every contact that we get is failure demand. So my strategy is all about identifying what that demand is and trying to implement change through technology to stop that demand coming through. So we're really good at identifying that demand, so we know exactly what we need to do. So we've got a long list of change that we want to deliver through technology, but the drag that I have or I experience is being able to get that technology to the top of the list to be able to implement that. So that's the challenge that I have to achieve the strategy at Atom. But thinking more broadly beyond Atom, I think some of the drag that could potentially be experienced in contact centres, and I think will be familiar to many, is things like challenges around budget, conflicting business priorities. I suppose the transition that many contact centres have gone through to digitalisation and the complexity that that might bring. change of working practices. So all of us will have been impacted at some point in terms of the impact of the pandemic. And then now we're approaching a different macroeconomic environment. So lots of change going on that could impact our contact centres through that as well. And then things like attrition levels, being able to retain your employees and your employees' well-being as well. And then for some of this that are in a regulated environment, regulation and compliance can be a considerable drag in terms of the business as well.
Interesting, and thank you for sharing both your experience and what you're seeing in the market. Anita, some of that must be resonating with you. Now, you're a strategic leader in a different space. You're in energy. It's renewable energy. You're an energy retailer. Keeping it real, what does drag look like for you?
I think anybody will be aware that we are in an energy crisis in the UK. So for us, there is an awful lot of drag. The compliance and regulation market has changed drastically, with 26 energy providers going into supplier of last resort in the last 12 months. So that has meant that the regulation around energy companies has tightened by Ofgem and are increasing further pressure and putting increased governance and risk and controls in place. So, you know, that came at a time when energy companies are trying to survive, do stuff, make their own changes with their people. And on top of that, changes in government have not helped in the last couple of months, because as a result of that, we were told, you are providing a scheme to support customers, so help household schemes. They went back on some of the changes. They gave energy companies 2 weeks with the information of what we needed to provide and different things. And on top of that, you've then got customer demand. Customer demand has increased by about 80% at the moment as a result of these schemes. So the drag for us is how we keep abreast and still keep building renewable energy, still keep going on with the direction of travel that we know we need to get to, against a backdrop that is out of our control. And that's a real challenge, I think, for certainly all energy providers in the UK currently.
Now, life isn't always like this as a strategic leader. Yes, you do get your challenges. We know that, but it's not always like that. So, I mean, when you've got these scenarios that are going to knock you off track, whether it's the macro environment, whether it's something that's happening within the business, it means you have to be able to respond to those circumstances outside of your control really quickly. Now we know that's not easy, but Helen, I'm going to come back to you. You're in financial services. Can you share some of those distractions that you've had? You know, you've been through, as a financial services sector, been through the mill over the last couple of years too.
Yeah, sure. So I think the key things for me that I'd like to share is so you have to be agile, as you said, Lee. You have to be able to listen. So you have to be able to listen to what's going on around you, but also what your teams and your people are sharing with you. And you do have to embrace when you need to change direction or adapt to those new challenges. And going back to a point that Rory made as well in terms of communication. So at the points that you're making those changes, you really have to communicate effectively. You have to tell the story. You have to tell the rationale to bring the team with you. So if you're changing direction, you have to make sure they're all engaged and that they're all working with you. But I also think you have to accept that occasionally there'll be setbacks. So you have to then be really resilient. You need to be able to bounce back. So, you know, you can see Anita's got numerous challenges that she's facing at the moment, but you have to stay with it and you have to keep coming back. But again, if you have that strong vision and that strategy, and if you think about Rory's map in terms of where he's heading to, whatever the challenges and distractions, you should always be able to bring yourself back to the direction that you're traveling in and stay true to that. And that's, it is easy to say that. It's not always as easy to do it, particularly when there's so much change and you're under a lot of pressure to deliver. But I think that's where it's really important to have built a high performing team. So during times of challenge and change, it's when your team really come to the fore to be able to support you to move forward.
So let's explore that a little bit more, the high performing team piece. And that is a key objective for senior leaders, is to create a brilliant team around them. But that in itself is not easy. So Emma Crow, I'm going to come to you. What do you need and how do you get a high performing team? You're our HR expert.
Well, thank you very much, Lee. I think for me, I mean, it's quite difficult, but there's some basic tenets that are important that will help creating a high performing team. For me, trust and purpose are two of the very most important tenets of building high performance teams. You know, you've got to create a stable team with the right people in the right place at the right time, but you've also got to create a cohesive and value aligned dynamics. They're completely fundamental to that process. I think developing a clear vision and strategy, and also having goals that are aligned to what the company or the team is trying to achieve, because it's really important that people can see, right, what their purpose is, why they do what they do, and how what they do is connected to the wider strategy, and how they are delivering value that's aligned with the strategy. With that, though, is also creating a safe environment for people to fail fast and encouraging an open, a culture of open communication. And this, I think, is really important, is collaboration over competition. And with that is also the importance of learning for the leader and for the team, because I think during the COVID pandemic, we really put our people at the heart of our decision making, both from an employee and customer perspective. And key for me in creating high performing teams is to remember the human at the center of what we do. Because, you know, at the end of the day, the future, your team, your talent may not be local, they may not be in the same city or town, they might be across borders. And I think to build a high performing team, we've got to be really skilled in creating cohesiveness, creating openness, and creating an environment where people feel that they can be challenged. They know why they do what they do, and they have security in what they do. Love
it. Rory, can I ask you if you've got any great tips on how to create a high performing team? You've played rugby at a very senior level. You've been in a very complex team environment with your flying. Have you got a tip on how to create high performing teams?
Well, I mean, the first thing, I'll endorse everything that Emma's just said. I agree with pretty much everything she said. And I think one of the things I find is that a lot of people just assume that we all know what teams are and how to form a team and I keep a team going. And the number of times I come across, we'll just throw 6 people at that issue, that problem, that challenge, that job, that whatever, and just naturally assume that they'll just work together as a high performance team. The All Blacks in the last 20, 30 years have been number one 75, 80% of the time. They didn't become the number one in the world for that period of time, but just because they just happened to turn up and just muddle through. They train and train and train. Now, one of the things I always talk about is if you take my world of rugby, you take my world of flying, we probably spent, roughly speaking, metaphorically speaking, 90% of our time training, preparing, getting ready, and 10% of our time doing. Now, if you take that into the business world, you can flip-flop it around. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should do 90% training, but when I hear companies say that we want to be world-class and you only spend 10% of your time or money or whatever training, guess what? And of course, when you think about the 10%, how much that 10% is actually stuff that you have to do anyway. So it's like a governance, compliance, especially what you've all been talking about, you know, the amount of things that you've got to get right. Otherwise, the authorities will be chasing after you. And probably 9% that you do that, or 1% is spent on actually developing your future leaders or developing people you have. So when you actually jump, you know, knock it down. So becoming a high performance team is not something that just happens. It takes time, money, resource, but effort to make it happen. And it's not something that it happens, that's it. You know, we can forget about it. It still has to be worked because everybody's trying to catch you up.
Right. I totally agree. You've got to keep working at your teams Emma, Doug, I'm going to come to you next. And I want to draw on something that Rory touched on, and Emma also just touched on a moment ago, and around vision and strategy. Now, Emma, you're a well-known face in the industry. You are leading the charge for CX excellence. But what do we mean by vision and strategy? And frankly, how do you get one?
Well, first of all, I'd love to have 90% shrinkage to be able to do all that training with the contact center teams. I think resource planning will have something to say about that, but no, thanks, Rory. That it did also remind me that we've got to make sure we utilize the time for giving the people that shrink that we have allowed to be their best selves. But in answer to your question, I think the thing for me, first off, is as leaders, removing the complexity about the word strategy itself, right? Rory touched on it earlier. Basically, strategy is a plan. And again, keeping to the theme of removing complexity, it should be succinct. And, when you're building a strategy, using really clear language. So I think, it starts with identifying where you are. So get your baseline and then define where you want to be. And then your strategy is how you're going to get there. And I would definitely say, a good strategy is really kind of calling out who your target customers are, how it feels when interacting with your brand or your team, what experiences you're trying to create, how your employees need to behave and support you with that strategy, and also making sure that there are metrics there to define both progress and how when you've reached the target, basically. So vision effectively is future state, and Rory, I think, referred to it as North Star. Where do you want to get to, basically? So what do we mean by vision and strategy? They're interlinked, but it's basically the direction of travel that you're taking your team on. And how do you get one? I mean, honestly, I think it's about, as leaders, being inquisitive. So looking out there across sectors and markets, who's innovating, who's creating great experiences for consumers, even looking at who are picking up awards, people that are winning awards, what are they doing? How are they, really delivering excellence for consumers? Who's winning customers? Who's retaining them, most importantly? So, and forums like this, Lee, the CCMA, it just allows us to really look in and tune into best practice. So I think, how do you get one? It's about looking around, looking at who's doing well and serving their consumers well, and then sitting down with your team, assessing where you are, looking at where you want to be, and setting out that plan together as to how you're going to get there.
So at a really high level, give us an example of what a strategy for the contact center might look like.
Well, Bill and Helen gave a great example earlier about, kind of being a self-service business, but, the vision might be to reduce avoidable contacts, to resolve queries first time. It might be to only serve consumers in digital channels. So those are just some simple examples, really, of strategy. And again, it's just about making it accessible by removing the words strategy and just saying, what's our plan? What's our vision? Where do we want to be? Being efficient, driving more kind of consumer satisfaction, whatever it is. But those would be some of the examples, I think, within a contact center, really simple ones.
Thank you. Now, and if you are a strategic leader that is, you're looking to set a strategy and create the tactical plan behind that, you're going to be leading change. We, as an industry, we've been through massive change in the last couple of years, continuously looking to improve what we're doing. So you've got that leadership around change, and as leaders, you're all looking to have an impact on your business, on your colleagues, on your customers, all looking to really make a difference. So what are the skills, or should I say competencies, that you need to be able to do that? Helen, can I ask you that question to you?
Yes, of course. So I think we've probably touched upon many of them as we've gone through the discussion. So resilience, I think I was talking about before. I think that's really important competency to have, because you are always going to be challenged. There's always going to be things that you have to be able to deal with and overcome. And then we've talked in terms of building high performance teams and that building trust. So people are so important in the contact center. If we haven't got good people that believe in what we're doing and have good engagement, it is very difficult to be able to achieve your vision and your strategy. So I think that's always really, really important. And part and parcel of that is the collaboration piece. So not only within the contact center itself, but also within your leadership team, but also right across the company that you work for. Because for me, the contact center is the central part of the organization. So you need to be collaborating right across the business, not just within the contact center itself. And that again leads on to how you manage your stakeholders. So you need to be managing those stakeholders upwards across the organization as well, in terms of making sure that you've got that support there to be able to deliver your strategy. And then I suppose talking about leadership and being inspiring, in leading change, you have to stay focused on what you're trying to deliver, and by doing that you need to inspire others, you need to motivate others, and making sure, again, back to that communication point, everyone knows what we're trying to achieve, and the storytelling that goes around that, and make it accessible for everybody. Everyone understands it. Again, back to Emma's point, make it really easy language that everyone can grab onto and understand. So there's lots in there, but yeah, hopefully that's answered the question, Lee.
And it's interesting, isn't it? I think the communications piece, that's I'm sure as long as business has been around, communication has not been as good as it could or should be. So I personally think that communication is a big part of being able to be an inspiring leader behind that. But Emma Crow, I'm going to come to you. Is there anything else that you would add to what Helen has said?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we know what's right for our customers and our people in terms of how we get things done. Super important to have a trusted team around you, right, that can give sound recommendations, and that we empower our teams. We're moving ever more into a digital world, and our customers and our people expect a lot from us, and they expect to be able to transact in a very, very simple way.
Yeah, absolutely. Rory, I want to ask you the same question. What's your view on this? What does it take? What are the competencies? What are the skills that you need to be as a leader today?
It's interesting because I was reflecting on this, I think last week, because I was trying to think about writing some blogs and things. And you think about what's going on in the country at the moment. I mean, Anita talked about the challenges within the energy crisis and stuff. I do feel that we are going into recession and various things, but by crikey, aren't we talking ourselves into it as well? But one of the things that when you hear people that are being interviewed on TV, not politicians or whatever, but the general public and various other people in and out of industry, etc., the one thing that always comes across to me is, what are people frightened? What are people not liking? It's all about uncertainty. In the whole context of just think what we're talking about, in the context of leadership, what we're trying to create is certainty. So if that's the case, to say that the pole, the North Star and the strategy, if you aren't able to communicate that effectively, then you're going to create uncertainty. And so people aren't going to know sure what they need to do, how they do it, when they do it, etc., etc., etc. So as Emma just said just now, it's got to be simple. You've got to be able to articulate the strategy as the senior leader of a business down through your organization in a way that is very, very simple. So you've got to get, what are my core messages I want to get across? It doesn't have to be the full detail, whether it's customer service, whether it's about people, whether it's about profit or value or whatever it is, that message has got to come through. So after a state of communicating, you get to ask people in the business, so what do you think the main themes that are coming out from whenever the leadership talk about? And if those three themes don't coincide with your core messages, then you ain't communicating effectively. Because one of the things I was writing notes there, the core messages one, and how do you know? That's my simplest and hardest question I ask all my clients, which they hate me for. How do you know? Oh, we're doing this and it's great. How do you know? And half the time they can't answer it. So, you know, that's the challenge for them. So it's the old KISS, core messages, and it's a repeat mantra. You've just got to keep bragging. Because I a number of times I go in and I said, the leader will say, I've been telling him. And you go and ask them and they go, 3 different versions of what the strategy is. And they go, but I've been telling them. And, you know, there's a difference between listening and hearing. So it's trying to get that across. And don't get me wrong, it's still hard, but you've got to keep at it.
And it's interesting, when we were doing some of the briefing conversations leading up to today, Emma Crow, you came out with something that just for me hit the nail on the head around the kind of person that you might be. And I'm going to throw it back into a question for you, but how important is IQ versus EQ for leaders today?
Again, I'll go back to how we behaved through COVID, right? I think during COVID, our leaders had to dig really, really deep into their EQ because we had to look after the whole of our employees. We had situations where we had employees at home that were struggling with their families or, you know, illness and trying to figure out how they were going to homeschool their children, but also worried about their jobs, particularly those employees that worked on the front line. And I really think that, and there was a big piece of work done by CIPD that said, you know, trust was the most important factor throughout that period, because we had to trust our people that they would show up and get work done, but trust our leaders to actually care and have empathy from all of us. And I think we all know that fantastic things took place throughout the pandemic. So I would say that, you know, emotional intelligence is the core tenet of all leadership, you know, and it goes back to, and it's a sports analogy, know your people on and off the field, right? You've got to care for your people. You've got to take care of your people, and you've got to know when they need help or a push or development. We deal with people. If you don't have emotional intelligence, you know, you're going to create drag in your business.
And I mean, just touching on the pandemic piece there, and I'm sure at some point we'll stop mentioning pandemics in various events, but I do want to touch on it because it was a period of time where leaders did get back into the detail, back into the operation, because they had to, because of the immense change we were going through. But as a leader, as Rory said, that's not really where you should be spending some of your time. And you know, you can't be experts in everything, especially, you know, when reflecting back as to how the contact center has changed. And if you are an expert in everything, then you get stuck doing all the doing and getting back into all the doing. I have a question around how tech savvy do you need to be? I mean, you know, we've talked about the need for technology, and you know, I do think you need to be a little bit tech savvy, but how tech savvy do you need to be? And Emma, I'm going to come back to you as HR, but Emma Dark, I'm going to ask you the same question from being a leader in the contact center. How tech savvy do you need to be? Emma Crow first.
So we're moving ever more into a digital world. When I was preparing for this conversation today, I kind of went to my network and said, where do you see our industry in 5 years? And every single person came back and said, digital. We're going to have much more automation, because again, our customers expect to be able to transact digitally in a very, very smooth and integrated way. And it has to be an enabler. So our leaders, you've got to be tech savvy, because you have not necessarily from doing the do, but you've got to know what technology is out there that's going to augment your customers' transactions. You've got to know what's in the industry. You've got to know where we're heading and what the right technology solution is for your people and your customers. So I would say it's very important. We're moving into a wholly digital world. People will always be important, but it's going to be people and technology.
Emma, go on, add to that. And actually, I'm then going to come to Helen, because obviously Atom Bank being a self-serve digital space, I'm going to ask your view on this as well, Helen. Go on, Emma Dark.
Yeah, I agree, Emma. And I think, but not to be scared about that as a leader as well. I think it's just about being inquisitive, as I said earlier, really being interested to know what technology is out there. But I would also say then leaning into your team and your SMEs within the operation to help you with that, and break down the silos as we talked about. Make sure that you lean into your technology partners in the business as well when on that journey. So 100% be tech savvy, but don't feel like it has to become your kind of, you're the expert. Just care about it enough. Be inquisitive, ask the questions, and lean on the people around you so you can build on that knowledge, really.
Go on, Helen. How tech savvy are you?
Well, to be honest, so my children find it hilarious that I'm COO of a digital bank, given my ability with technology. So, but I think that the key thing for me is that awareness piece that we've all touched upon, but it's been really clear about what problem you're trying to solve. So there's so much technology and solutions out there, it's like, kids in a toy shop, isn't it? You could pick this, that, so much choice out there, but it's been really clear in terms of what you're trying to solve and what's your problem statement, what do you need, and I think if you do that, then you can use technology to great effect. Otherwise, it's really challenging, and you can end up spending lots of money on different technology that gives you absolutely nothing at the end of the day.
And Helen, sorry, I would just add to that, because it also has to be about what your customers want, because I think we can make assumptions, and if we don't listen to our customers and our people, we could have a solution that frustrates rather than enhances.
Yeah, very true.
No, fantastic. And now, Anita, I want to bring you back into the conversation here. We were chatting the other day, and you were telling me that because of the current situation you're going through, that you started to describe earlier, you've had the opportunity to go back to the floor, and which, I shared yesterday, actually, there's a CEO that was visiting a contact center, which fantastic. More CEOs should be visiting their contact centers and listening to calls and seeing what's going on. But as a leader of the contact center, you've had the opportunity to go back to the floor. Tell us what that, I'm going to say, tell us a little bit maybe around the why, but what the benefit of you doing that has been.
Yeah, I guess, it's great that you see it as an opportunity, right? So sometimes it's a needs must, which you can turn into an opportunity, all right? So, with a huge increase in demand, our people are under more pressure than they've ever been, all right? So firsthand, it was about me showing that we're all in it together, that that if I actually respond to customers and take some calls and do some emails and respond to customers, but I understand that now I am not an expert in all those things, so I can pick out bits that I can do, and I do that to help, and I'm doing that at weekends and different things, when giving up my own time almost to show that. So one, that brings them a little bit closer to me, our people, and they can see that I'm not just expecting them to do that. But there have been other benefits. We're going through a huge digital transformation, building a whole new program that will be new online journeys for our customers and for ourselves. So it enabled me to understand what our customers are going through, what they're asking for, and tying that into, are the systems that we are currently designing, are they going to be fit for purpose? Are they going to help us drive that right behavior? Because I have this saying all the time, it's a bit of the Kevin Costner Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. Right, I need to build a platform for our customers that they are going to want to use. From a strategic point of view, cost to serve is huge, driving down that cost. But it's also then understanding, do our people, are our people feeling so overwhelmed with the amount of contact and the awful stories that we are hearing from those customers? So are they still feeling in love with us as a brand, or are they feeling the pressure? Our purpose is to make Britain greener. That's what we say to our people all the time. Our customers help us build more renewable energy sources to help make Britain greener and to help us be in a better place for the future. So actually every customer interaction and the way that they handle that with our customer and the way that they feel about that ties back into our strategy. And it does, and it's enabled some of the work doing to be able to spot things where departments aren't collaborating in the way they should, and we can see customers are bouncing. So the ability to do it has been great. I'd like to call it breathing space almost, to take me out of some of the top stuff that I do. I don't want to spend every day in that little dark pool that it has become at the moment. But actually, there have been some really good benefits that I can take back to the boardroom, use that to the advantage to help our people, our customers, what we're doing. So I think it has some real benefit. And actually, I think I'm going to make a bit more of an effort to spend a bit more time doing that from time to time. Although Rory, I'm going to go back. I don't want to be, coming right back down the little triangle. I'd like to sort of stay in the top, but try and just get a bit more of a balance.
Thank you so much, Anita. And you touched there on collaboration and the importance of making sure that you are collaborating not just within your contact center operation, but the importance of collaborating with marketing, with production, with finance, just making sure that you are the link between all of those other functions in the business.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from building the digital platform has been huge for us. So we started to approach it with every department talking about their needs, and we very clearly, very quickly ripped that up and actually put cross-functional teams to map the journey from end to end, looked at where people's targets were clashing, looking at what KPIs, the handoff, the failure demand, all of that. But on top of that, getting those teams to challenge each other has been great. But actually what we then did is very quickly, using our UX designer and our comms team with marketing, is worked out, okay, where is our marketing going wrong? Where is the comms going wrong? And actually got them to come and actually be in every blueprinting and wireframing session so they understood the customer journey, because actually they're now recognizing that all of that customer contact in one way or another is our brand. And how important it was to align all of those things. So you're right, it's become a much more complex environment, but actually it's about giving the contact center the voice and strategically helping those other departments to recognize how we join all that together and make that work for us successfully as a business.
Wow, thank you. Do you know what? I think we could carry on. Have we got about 3 days that we can carry on this conversation? It's fascinating. There's so many more areas that we could touch on. Emma Crow, can I come to you for a final thought? What are the big 3 pieces of advice that you would give those that are aspiring to be a contact center leader, or maybe those that are in positions very similar to the panel today? What advice would you give?
Well, as I reflect on the discussion, I hear 3 key themes. So customers, people, and technology. So my first piece of advice is look after your people. Be clear on the plan and how your team contributes. Because I think by using emotional intelligence, by inspiring and caring for our people will look after our customers. I think as a leader, failing to take care of your people is going to be a drag on your business. So keep humanity and humbleness at the center of your leadership style. When I think about processes, I really do think that a leader should know the business processes well enough to understand the journey that our people take, right? To provide that optimized customer experience. It doesn't mean that you need to be in the detail. I liked what Anita said about, hey, I spent some time and I learned a lot, but walking in your employees and your customer shoes and having the ability to then transform is it's really, back to Rory, thrust your business forward. And then I think number 3 is technology, right? Our industry and society is becoming much more automated. And feedback from our customers on what they want and what they need. I think it's so critical in how we shape our technology solution, one that works for your customers. And also in HR, the technology solution that works for your people. Leaders have got to understand what technology is available and what it can do, but don't just kind of plunk it in there because it's new and sexy. Make sure that it does answer your customers' requirements. They're my 3 takeaways, Lee.
Thank you, Emma. And this has been fascinating. As I say, we could carry on talking for several days, I'm sure. Or as Rory suggested, it's a 3-year program to do a strategic leadership course. So, hey, 3 years. I want to say a huge thank you. I know that there are some questions that have come through, and we will endeavour to get some answers to those questions, and we will publish those on our website. So thank you so much for putting those questions through and those comments. I hope that everybody here has found it interesting and inspiring. I'd like to say a huge thanks to Rory for joining us today. Appreciate you giving us the time. But also to our brilliant panel, Helen, Anita, Emma, and Emma. You have been awesome. Thank you guys for giving us your time. I know that you're all incredibly busy. Being a strategic leader is a busy job. There is no time. And also thank you so much to TTEC and Genesis for enabling us to have this conversation. So I really, really appreciate that. And if you're wondering about whether you need to think more strategically, there's actually a training course on the Academy around thinking strategically. So I'm just going to throw that in there. So until next time, thank you so, so much. Stay safe, stay warm, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.